process to be diagnosed as someone who's got ADHD, it's a long process because, as we know, the waiting lists are either too long. So we're talking about a 2-year wait on the NHS waiting list on average. Just seeing how somebody could be so unwell at the start, and through obviously medication, therapy, and just input from the whole multidisciplinary team, how they could get to a better place. But the scariest part for me was going onto the wings, getting to know them and getting to know their history, the type of crime they committed. There were a lot of people who did not have any diagnosis, and I saw a lot of that underlying stuff that hadn't really been looked at before coming into prison. Right. A lot of the time which led them to come to prison and committing their crime. And that's when I started to realize just what was going on in the criminal justice system and the lack of...
You're not defined by where you come from.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big message that I always want to tell people.
Like you have to be able to be uncomfortable. Yeah. Like be comfortable with being uncomfortable. When you grow up in ends, you don't realise it when you're confident, but you have an audacity to do things that ordinarily most people wouldn't be willing to do.
Welcome to another episode of the podcast. We got special guests in the building. Jenny, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm warmer now.
Yeah?
So thank God for that, yeah.
You're feeling quite cold, right?
It's freezing, honestly. I know we're end of November, so I don't know. Is this winter? Could you class this as winter? I don't know. Yeah. So I understand, but still, I never get used to the cold. I'm not a winter baby.
You're not a cold person?
I'm more of like maybe spring, like somewhere in the middle. I don't like it too hot either.
Okay, so you don't like too hot and you don't like too cold?
Yeah, I'm very picky.
Really?
just right.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I don't think we even get weather like that, right? Our weather in the UK is so extreme. It's like really, really cold. Because I guess it'll be cold until probably March.
Yeah.
And then April, a bit mild. And then pretty much summer, right?
Yeah.
We don't really get like
a
summer. Full season. That's true. You're right.
Maybe we get like a couple of days of blazing heat and then that's it.
And that's it. And then it's just rain, right?
And it's just rain. Typical UK.
Crazy. Yeah. So tell the people, who is Jenny?
Who is Jenny? Who am I? So it's always hard to talk about myself. So I'm an occupational therapist, forensic mental health occupational therapist. So essentially I work in the mental health sector. So that's in the community, in psychiatric hospitals, and also in prisons as well. So that's where the forensic comes in place. Wow. So that's usually my 9 to 5. I've recently, taken up another role within commissioning. So a higher role where you support people with getting placed in different areas in London in the right type of settings. So residential homes or secure supported living and things like that. But I'm sure we'll talk about that later on. So that's my 9 to 5. And then I'm also, I guess I could call myself a speaker. I still find it a little bit weird to say, but yeah, I'm a speaker. I talk about mental health, especially mental health within the Black community, and also neurodiversity as well. So people with various types of neurodevelopmental conditions, not just autism or ADHD. There's many, many more that a lot of people don't really know about. Okay. So I speak on those type of topics and also consult for companies as well. And then I've got my own company that focuses on initial screening for those type of neurodevelopmental conditions, because as we know, the waiting lists are either too long. So we're talking about maybe a 2-year wait on the NHS waiting list and on average. And then if you do want to go privately, usually it costs thousands of pounds. So I try to sort of bridge that gap and also target communities that don't necessarily get the right support in that sense, especially when it comes to early diagnosis or early intervention. For
wow. You do a lot.
So I hope...
Even your 9 to 5 is a lot. I'm just like, wow, like you're working at like 4 or 5 places.
Yeah, but it's been over like, a series of years. I've just recently come out of like working in prison full time because it was a lot. I enjoyed it, but it was very restrictive. So I wanted to come out more and, you know, now I'm doing more like community-based stuff. And I get to work from home as well, which is new. You know, I used to get so jealous of my friends who were working from home.
Oh my gosh. So when did that start happening, the work from home?
When I got this new job.
Oh, really?
So that was early this year. That was early this year. So I still go into like hospitals and prisons to do my assessments. So I'll say it's like hybrid working.
Okay.
And then, I take up some meetings from home. And yeah, I'm really enjoying it. Who knew
good.
This could be fun?
Okay.
So.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So, before, I definitely, you know, I'm so interested in hearing more about this, and especially like the neurodiversity, because I feel like that's like a conversation that we don't have much of. Even ADHD, I'm seeing a lot more conversation about that, and I'm quite happy about that, because I'm seeing that, you know, a lot of people may not have been diagnosed, and, you know, things like that. So it'd be good to speak a little bit more about that. I guess, you know, starting with your story, I guess, where your parents from?
Nigeria.
Okay,
Both
cool.
Nigerian. Yeah.
Both Nigeria. Wait, do you know, I always ask this, but were you born there? Were you born here?
No, so I was born in Germany.
Ah, okay.
Grew up
That's
in
interesting.
Belgium for a couple of years.
Oh.
And then I came to the UK in 2005.
Oh wow. Okay.
I've
So
moved around.
do you speak German?
No, so I left Germany when I was like a baby. So when I grew up in Belgium, I grew up on the Dutch side.
Oh.
So I speak Dutch. It's called Flemish, but people are like, what's Flemish? So I just say Dutch.
Okay, so you speak Dutch. Oh, that's crazy.
Just a little
Dutch
bit though.
in Belgium?
Yeah, it's split into
Oh.
two. You've got the French side and you've got the Dutch
I
side.
was always thinking it was like just French in Belgium. I didn't know that they had
The
a
French
Dutch
side is maybe more like Brussels,
Ah.
just close to
What areas
France.
is that in Belgium that speak Dutch?
That's a good question. I don't know. So I don't know. Maybe the side that's closest to the Netherlands, I would
Okay.
say.
I'm definitely
I
going to
don't
do
know
my
what
research
side.
on
Yeah,
that. That's
yeah,
interesting.
should.
That's mad. Okay, so you and your parents moved to the UK, right? So
Yeah.
you grew up in the UK. Whereabouts in the UK do you grow up in?
So Southeast London.
Okay, Southeast London.
Yeah.
Oh, mad. What was it like
Southeast
growing up in
London.
Southeast London?
Well, I mean, when I first came here, obviously I was really young. I was very surprised in terms of how diverse it was, because obviously the side that I grew up in Belgium, it was not diverse at all.
Okay.
Especially in school, me being one of two of the only Black people in my my year. So when I came to the UK, to London, Southeast London, I was very surprised, and I thought, goodness me, why are there so many Black people? You know?
Yeah.
But you know, growing up in Southeast London was fun. Fun in terms of like, obviously you get to meet different types of people. There's lots of energy. I think at the same time, of course, you know, and it's not just in Southeast London, but just in London in general, like, you know, crime and all that kind of stuff. So I grew up on an estate, not there anymore, but I grew up on Aylesbury estate, which is known to be the most notorious.
I know people from around there,
Do
yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
imagine, you know, I grew up there, and obviously I was
Okay.
never involved in anything. But, you know, you would see stuff and you would hear about, like, you know, criminal activity and things like that. But yeah, it's just something I thought was, you know, normal. But I never let it sort of affect me growing up. So my mum, what was good is that my mum would always, like during summer or during half-term breaks, would go back to Belgium. So I'd sort of be away, or I'd go to like summer school, like acting classes and things like she just wanted me to get involved in things like ballet. I did tap dancing and jazz, and she really put me in a lot of group activities and clubs.
So you feel like she was the kind of like, she didn't want you to be influenced about in the area. She kind of saw that and were like, okay, let me keep you active and doing things that gotta have a positive impact.
Exactly.
In your life.
For me and I have two younger brothers as well. So I think it was just important for her to keep us busy and keep our minds busy as well, and just away from our surroundings, really.
It's mad. it's crazy because I know Aylesbury very,
You know, right?
I know it very, 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 very well. I basically kind of grew up near there. like grew up there because I knew people there, so I kind of grew up there, so I know what it's like. And yeah, like you said, it's been it's being knocked down, or the majority of it is gone pretty much. Like it's mad.
But you know, it's meant to be knocked down, and some places have been. So for people who don't know, it's a bunch of high-rise tower blocks, grey and, you know, gloomy and everything, and they're not fit for purpose at all. So they had this whole demolition scheme, but there's been certain delays and people are still living there in those type of conditions. So it's just sad to see that nothing's really changed as much. And I've seen like even documentaries being made on it still to this day. So although I'm glad to not be living there anymore, I still feel for people who are still there. But then at the same time, I know that there is a community there, a good community of people who have obviously made a life there, made friends, and, you know, there's culture there as well. So it's just striking that balance. But
how do you feel that like you managed to kind of excel despite like living like, you know, in Aylesbury estate? Like how do you feel like that happened?
I don't know. I think I was just I've always been very tunnel vision in terms of like, I knew that I didn't want that kind of life. So, and this is why like a lot of the time when I say, you know, I grew up on Aylesbury estate, they're like, like you don't really look like that type. You know, I guess there's a stereotype, right? Of, you know, how you should act and things like that. But I was just very much like, I don't want to do this. I can see that it leads people into a negative path. And, you know, my mum, she would always ask me like, you know, what do you want to do in the future? And not necessarily putting pressure, but I think she just wanted to plant seeds in my head in terms of, you know, you can do much better than this. And and I just, obviously having friends on the estate and seeing what happened to them just made me want to stay away from that. So I don't think I had any doubt in my head in terms of, you know, was I ever going to be influenced by those type of things. I wasn't influenced in that sense, but it definitely like looking back now and what I'm doing as my job, I think it definitely influenced, you know, the type of pathway that I'm on in terms of like mental health and working in criminal justice, and just seeing some of the barriers that people face in those type of places. So I think that's what it did for me.
That's good. Wow, that's amazing. And you know what? It's crazy because I feel like sometimes living in those kind of areas, sometimes like you say, sometimes you're like, oh, I don't want this. I want a better life for me. And then you fight so hard to have that better life. So it's not always bad living in these areas. Of course, like, you know, some people go like completely the wrong way, and we obviously don't want that for like anybody. Wow, that's crazy. So okay, so school wise, right? Were you quite into your studies at school?
Yeah, very much so. Very much into my studies. And I was very quiet and introverted. I feel like I still am, maybe, you know, because I'm doing more like public things. I've grown in confidence in that sense, but I was just very quiet. I'd only been in the country for a couple of years, so even I could speak English, but I couldn't read or write, so I had to learn that all from scratch.
In English.
In English, sorry.
Cool.
So I could in Dutch, but not in English. But I tried hard. Again, my mum put me in like extra curricular activities, had tutors as well. And yeah, so in school I was quiet, introverted, but then I was also involved in choir, our school plays. And I was definitely like maybe like a teacher's pet. Like
I wanted that.
You know, so I remember like in school, I don't know if other schools had it, but we had a merit system. And essentially like you would get a merit for like good behavior, like a star on your diary. So being the teacher's pet that I was, during lunchtime, I'd stay inside and I would pack up all the books in the library and, you know, try and help out the teachers and stuff. And I don't know, I don't know really why I did it, but I just wanted to help. And, I found it fun.
Wow. So were you like a star student, a student, or very close to that?
Maybe very close. So we had like different forms. So I was in top set for quite a lot of things, or like second set. So I was smart, but maybe not like the smart. Like I knew quite a few people who were smarter than me. But yeah, I was very much into my studies, especially the sciences, but also the creative side as well. I was quite creative. Like I did art, graphic design, and obviously, like I said, involved in plays. So I had a good mix.
How did you get down to the like psychology pathway?
Yeah.
How did you get to that?
So, I mean, it's going to sound cliche, but I'd always been interested in how the mind works, right? But I think what started it for me in terms of psychology was there was a show, I say back in the day, I don't know how long that was, called Waterloo Road.
I don't know if you remember Waterloo Road.
Waterloo Road. That was the show. And essentially it's based on a school it wasn't in London, somewhere in the UK, and it shows like the lives that the students go through, the teachers, controversy and all that kind of stuff. And one of the episodes was an episode on how one of the students got how they developed a mental health disorder called schizophrenia, and it was drug induced. And I just kept thinking, like, how could somebody be hearing voices or seeing things that aren't there? So I think that definitely started it for me in terms of, wanting to learn more about the mind and how our environment affects that. Maybe like where you grew up, the activities that you engage in, and whether it's genetic. And, so I knew that I wanted to go into like the mental health side of things. Wasn't sure if it was going to be like to be a psychologist or psychiatrist. So I was still kind of feeling it out. And so in year 10, we had like work experience.
Okay.
So I had the opportunity to do that at King's College. And it was on, I don't even know what ward, some sort of physical ward. And I spoke to my supervisor at the time, and I told them that I was interested in mental health. And right opposite was Maudsley Hospital, which is a psychiatric hospital. So I spent a day in there. And I think from then on, I was like, okay, this is the area that I want to get into. So it was just a matter of like going on the NHS website and seeing what kind of roles I felt were suited to me.
Wow, so you knew from quite young actually.
Yeah.
Like in school. That's
Our school was very much. So I went to Sacred Heart in Camberwell, and for those who went to Sacred Heart, they were very education focused. Like our our head teacher used to. I mean, looking back now, it wasn't nice to say to people, but he would say, "Oh, do you want to go to the school, University of McDonald's?" Like, he would really be very onto us about like knowing what you want to do when you grow up. And obviously, like, not everybody gets to know that at that age. Like, some people change, some people don't know until later on in life. But I think that definitely influenced me kind of getting straight into it.
Okay. Wow. You know what's great? This is gonna sound very crazy. When you said Sacred Heart, I was like, what is going on?
What?
That is my school. Yeah, I went to that school.
No way.
Yeah, I went to Sacred Heart. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
So do you know the head teacher I'm talking about then? The person when
it's gonna sound was he biracial? It might have changed because I went. I'm revealing my age. I went between 2000 and 2005.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know when he started, but
we can talk about it offline.
I don't want to be
revealing people's personal details.
But I guess you probably understand the culture in terms of how the school was. They were very serious.
Very serious, and to be honest, if you think about it, I always think about it. That's why they said it was the best school in Southwark, because we had you have all types of people. You have very smart kids, but then you have people who have potential but they're very disruptive, and they were able to manage that. And obviously there was incidents happen, but if I'm talking about like in terms of my whole school, because I was there for up until year 9. I went to Nigeria for year 10 and I came back.
Okay.
not that many incidents happen, if I'm being honest. But yeah, it was a good school. It was a good school.
Yeah,
it was a very,
it's a
very
good
good
one.
school. Fond memories. Fond memories. Okay, so you kind of decided from like young that you wanted to go down that trajectory. So did you end up going to university to study?
Yeah. I went to university. I went to Oxford Brookes University, and I studied occupational therapy.
Okay. Occupational therapy.
To become an occupational therapist.
Okay, cool.
But I guess with occupational therapy, you're dual trained.
Okay.
So that means that you're trained in the physical health side of things and the mental health side.
Okay. What's that? Like, what's the physical?
I guess they wanted us to. Well, they want us to kind of know about everything like holistically.
Okay.
And then once you've completed your degree, you can then choose what area you want to work in.
Okay.
And to practice as an occupational therapist, you do have to a certain degree, depending on where you want to work, but in mental health, have some knowledge on like the anatomy, physiology side of things. Wow. So even our placements, I did a placement on a neurology and stroke ward as well.
Oh.
So I had to do everything, even though I maybe didn't like it as much.
Okay. What was your least favorite out of all of them?
That one.
That was the least. Why? Like, why? Isn't that kind of interesting? Knowing why? I guess it's more health related, but
it was interesting, but not as interesting as what I knew the mental health side was.
Okay,
So I guess
cool.
maybe I was just very fixated. I was also on a post-polio ward, which I thought was interesting as well, because I hadn't really heard about the whole polio stuff. And it was a specialist unit. So yeah, it was my least favorite. It wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
But it wasn't my favorite one. And then so that was my first one. My second one was in secure mental health services.
Okay.
So that's essentially like a psychiatric hospital, but that has a higher level of security because of the risk that the patients have towards other people and also towards themselves. And I really enjoyed it.
Did you? Isn't that like kind of a bit dangerous?
You're like
yeah,
there is a level of risk, 100%, but it is managed quite well, I will say. Like, you know, they do review that usually on a daily basis, depending on how risky that person is. But for me, it was just seeing how somebody could be so unwell at the start, and through obviously medication, therapy, and just input from the whole multidisciplinary team, how they could get to a better place.
Yeah.
And also it taught me a lot of patience, because some people, it took them just a couple of months, some people it took them years, and then you got some people who they are very difficult to treat. So like they call them treatment resistant. So I just found that really fascinating. And then also the fact that they had a forensic history. So it just made me think, you know, how are the two connected? And, you know, I wanted to learn more about that. And I told my university tutor at the time that I really liked it. Could you give me another placement like that for my next one? Okay. You don't really get to choose, but I thought, you know, let me just say it. And for my final placement, they then sent me to Broadmoor Hospital, which is high maximum security hospital, one of the highest in the UK. I know. My mum was like,
edge, right? Oh my God.
My mum was like, what is wrong with this girl? You know, fair enough, she wants to go into health, but then fair enough, she wants to go into mental health. And then now this. So, but I was very excited. I obviously watched the documentary. But I wanted to find out more, because I knew that whatever the media had said about Broadmoor, I knew that there was more to it. And it ended up being my favorite one. My favorite one. And it gave me a whole different perspective on why people go through the criminal justice system and how people become so unwell. You know, what do you do with people who are really risky, and to the public and also to themselves? What kind of treatment is there available? So I learned a lot.
Wow. That's
so I was I don't know, I feel like I'm a thrill seeker. I don't know what to call it. I don't know. I'm very curious.
I mean, and to be honest, I think that's the part of society when we think about psychiatry. I feel like that's what people think. They don't think about the everyday person and mental health. They think, oh, you know, people with serious mental health. I mean, in your experience there, was it people with serious mental health, or was it just people who were with mental health issues but were dangerous?
It was a whole spectrum.
Okay.
Like, you know,
Okay.
you know, you'd have like different wards that were separated into like either different levels of risk, or they will take on people who had different types of conditions. So maybe you had like a PD, which is personality disorder unit, and then you also had like a psychosis unit as well. So it really just depends. But you're right, like there's a whole spectrum of mental health conditions that vary in terms of risk. They also vary in terms of reoccurrence as well, and how they've come about. Like, not all psychosis is drug induced, for example. It can also be genetic. It can be due to trauma. Like, there's just different reasons for a lot of them. But yeah, and that's another thing. You know, psychiatry is such a huge and wide thing as well. And you know, you've got people who maybe suffer from anxiety, and then you've got people who, you know, maybe suffer from, I don't even want to say like a more serious condition, because different conditions affect people differently. But it's just a matter of, you know, how, you know, they deal with it, and also how well they respond to treatment. That's another thing as well.
Yeah. Wow. You know what is reminding me of Hannibal. Have you watched that film, Hannibal?
What?
Hannibal.
No.
You need to watch Hannibal.
What's it about?
It's about a psychologist interviewing I think he's a cannibal. He's a cannibal. Yeah. He's
right.
a guy that's a cannibal.
Well.
Yeah. But he's super intelligent, basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't want. That's all I wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. You should.
I'm gonna add that to my list, because I like stuff like that.
Yeah, that's what it reminds me of. That kind of conversation. And actually, there's another series that I've watched called Mindhunter, where I'm pretty sure it's the guy. I think he's a psychologist, or is he a police officer? He's one of the two, and they just go around interviewing criminals to understand what their mindset and stuff are. You know what the thing is? I think a lot of people think that with people that go into psychologists, they like CSI and stuff. I like CSI.
I like CSI as well.
Honest. I think most people like CSI. They glamorize it, right? They make it seem so cool. Okay, so you worked in you know, you did a few placements, and then you got into occupational therapy, right? After university, right? What does give us a bit of a highlight of what a occupational therapist does?
Yeah. So an occupational therapist usually is confused with occupational health. It's different.
Okay,
They're two completely separate things. Like, occupational health is more focused on, you know, the workplace well-being and all that kind of stuff. And even though I guess we do have the skills to work in that type of setting, but occupational therapy refers to supporting people with physical or mental health conditions and getting them back into daily life. And it's therapy through activity. So, for example, somebody who might have had a traumatic brain injury, getting them back into, you know, washing and dressing, and then maybe somebody who has a mental health condition or a cognitive disorder, getting them back into doing the daily things that they were doing before and upskilling them in that sense. Okay. We do a lot of functional assessments, functional capacity assessments, and we also do other various cognitive assessments as part of a wider team. So alongside the psychologists and the psychiatrists and, you know, nurses and whatnot, speech and language therapists. And we work as a team to devise a plan. And occupational therapists can work in so many different settings. So obviously hospitals, we can work in schools, prisons. Some people work in the army. Okay. So supporting people who may have had like physical health conditions as a result of, I don't know, being deployed and that type of stuff. So the type of job you can get into is very varied. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to study this course, because just in case I change my mind, at least I can sort of pivot into different things. But occupational therapy isn't necessarily known about as much unless you are receiving the treatment, or if you, I don't know, if you know somebody, or if you're quite clued up in terms of the different types of therapy that's available.
That's epic. So how did you get into I guess, what was your journey into like did you just start working for the NHS first, and then you started going to like prisons and then doing other stuff?
Yeah, so I managed to reconnect back with my second placement that I did, and I saw that there was a job vacancy available. It was with the NHS, but you know, were employed by the NHS, but you do have some dealings with like Ministry of Justice. And because I liked the placement, I applied, got the job, and that was my first sort of role as an occupational therapist. And you start off as a band 5. So once you're qualified, you get your PIN registration. You're qualified to practice as a band 5. There's about, is there 9 bandings or 8? I can't even remember. But you go up, you know, the level depending on experience, and, you know, depending on the role as well. Our roles can be quite flexible. So some occupational therapists work as care coordinators as well. So that's essentially care coordinating a person's care, mainly in the community. So dealing with like medication and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a good opportunity to get my feet on the ground. I was quite familiar with it, had a huge interest, and I really enjoyed that role. I was at that place for about 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And then from there, where did you go to? Is that the point that you went to the prisons or doing other stuff?
No, so before that, I had a short stint in the community as a care coordinator.
Okay.
I mean, it was okay, but it was very stressful. I'll be honest with you. It was really stressful, and it was also around the time where the pandemic hit as well. So my caseload was massive.
Wow.
And you know, the rest of my colleagues, and I just thought, gosh, I can't do this. You know, I just didn't want to do it anymore. But you know, I learned a lot, and then afterwards, I went to, what was my job afterwards? I think I went back into secure services and private hospitals as well. And that's when I applied for my role as a therapy lead. So I kind of went up the banding. So I applied for the role as the occupational therapy lead, and day center manager at the prison. And I kind of, you know, before going into prison, I wanted to make sure I had enough experience on the wards and the community, because I knew prison, it's not clinical at all. The team is going to be smaller. It's a higher role with more responsibility. So you have to lead a team. So I just wanted to get that experience first before that. Got the job, and it was just it was a whirlwind. It was, as much as I prepared for the job, I still felt a little bit unprepared at the same time, because it was such a huge shift from what I was used to.
In what ways?
Well, that was my first time in a prison.
Okay.
First of all.
Okay. Because the other one it wasn't a prison, it was like,
so a psychiatric hospital.
Yeah, okay, yeah, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, so even though, like, you know, you had certain security in psychiatric hospital, it still looked clinical to you. Yeah. But in prison, like, it's a prison. And you know, there was so many like gates and so many security measures put in place that I just thought, gosh, this is a lot. And it can also be daunting as well, because it was massive. But the scariest part for me, which I didn't realize it would be, was going onto the wings and just seeing so many. So it was a men's prison that I was working at as well. Wow. So I don't know if it makes a difference, but yeah, it was a men's prison. Yeah. And just seeing that many people in and out, and the wings, like the hallway corridor areas, are really narrow as well, and it's loud. There's like bells and alarms like every single second, and it was very overwhelming when I first started.
Wow, gosh, how did you deal with that?
Lots of prayer and kind of rethinking, like, is this really for me? But you know, I had a really good manager. She was a psychologist, and we both sort of started around the same time, so we kind of were leaning on each other. And then, so I was part of the mental health inpatient team, which is quite a small team. So in the prison, you have like 1,000+ prisoners, and you focus mainly on those who are obviously at a greater risk to themselves and others. So we had a really small team. As part of the therapy team, it was just myself and the junior staff, and I had to essentially build a team. They gave me a budget as well to redesign the whole therapy center. So I kind of saw it as a fun project at the same time. until I saw the waiting list of people that needed to be seen. And I kid you not, it was maybe around 200.
Really?
And I thought,
wow,
how am I going to do this? How am I going to prioritize?
Wow. So 200 people waiting to come and see you.
Waiting
Oh
to
my
be
God,
assessed.
that's crazy.
And I saw that
Wow.
was common across the different disciplines as well, like in mental health. And I just thought, how are they prioritizing this? And that's when I started to realize just what was going on in the criminal justice system, and the lack of funding, the shortage of staff, and all that kind of stuff, and how that's impacting, you know, the
Wow.
prisoners and their mental health, those
Yeah.
that needed to be seen.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I'm wondering, like, in terms of, because that's where you started thinking about neurodiversity. Were you coming across many people that was neurodiverse? Is that what was happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So people who, you know, we thought, you know, from getting to know them and getting to know their history, the type of crime they committed, how they came to that, there were a lot of people who did not have any diagnosis. So that was quite difficult because, you know, to get a diagnosis for ADHD or ASD or some of the other ones, it takes a long time, right? So a lot of time it was just looking at someone and just seeing how they behave, hearing feedback from the officers, and actually saying, okay, I think this person might have this, like we need to explore this further. And I saw a lot of that. A lot of people who did not have any diagnosis whatsoever, and obviously didn't have the right support before coming in. And it wasn't just to do with neurodiversity, it was also like mental health. And I'm talking about maybe depression, anxiety, underlying stuff that hadn't really been looked at before coming into prison. It was a lot of the time which led them to come to prison and committing their crime.
Okay. That's crazy. That's not fair though, is it?
Of course not.
No,
of course not. And there's a huge gap, you know, it stems so far back from even in school, you know, the type of people who, you know, in most schools, like those who had challenging behaviors usually are excluded or sent to like PRU, so pupil referral unit. And, you know, they talk about the whole school to prison pipeline. So usually that's where it stems from. And, you know, some people get the right support earlier on and some people just don't.
Yeah.
And I found that there was a huge disparity between even the Black and ethnic minority patients that I had compared to, let's say, the white counterparts. So usually with the Black patients, I would see through their history that, you know, they were excluded, involved in gang-related crimes and all that kind of stuff, and not much input in terms of their mental health or support for those behavioural challenges compared to, you know, the white counterparts. Not to say that it's not there, but it was just more prevalent in the Black and ethnic communities that I was seeing on my caseload. So I know that there are still huge gaps in early intervention and just the right support that are provided for these people. And it's not to say that this is why somebody commits a crime and, you know, it's justified. No, it's not justified, but it at least gives you a sense of how people get into those type of conditions.
Yeah. I guess, obviously, you can never say on the record it can completely be prevented, but there's a chance that it could be prevented if they get the support, if there's somebody talking to them about what is the issue, right? Because I guess when somebody's misbehaving, it's kind of like just punishment. They just get a punishment. Oh, you're in detention.
Yeah.
There's no what's going on at home, what's going on outside of home, who are you hanging out with. There's none of that kind of stuff, right? The intervention doesn't go that far, it doesn't seem.
Yeah.
Like, does it?
And I suppose I can't really blame anyone in terms of, let's say, the teachers, for example, because they're under an enormous amount of stress already.
Course. Yeah, it's not
you
their
know,
job,
and then having to put another hat on in terms of looking at, you know, whether somebody's mental health. And of course, you do have a responsibility to some extent, like maybe safeguarding and stuff like that. But absolutely, you can't, it's like a domino effect, right? So if somebody is continuously misbehaving and the underlying problem isn't being looked at, or at least a point of discussion. So, for example, you might have some young people who are homeless. They haven't got a home. They're coming into school looking all scruffy and everything, getting involved in, criminal activity, and it's not being addressed. As that person becomes older and they continue that type of cycle, usually the crimes then become bigger and bigger, and I would say it's not that it's too late as you get older, but it's much harder to undo all of those like cycles. It's much easier that's what I'm talking about in terms of early intervention. It's much easier to kind of nip it in the bud and support a person at an earlier stage. But again, with funding, lack of staffing, it's really, I would say, the government that has a huge part to play in this and what they're willing to invest in as well. So,
do you feel like if people are receptive, I mean, the patients that you've seen that have been receptive to like therapy, have you seen a meaningful change in them from your perspective?
Yeah, so for those, like you said, for those who are, because there's a huge amount of people who aren't.
Bad man don't need therapy, right?
Yeah, no, for various reasons. Maybe they just don't believe in therapy, or they don't. You've got some people who don't even believe that they have a mental health condition because of, the stereotypes attached to it. They don't want to know. I remember, like, during the first couple of weeks when I started, actually, I think it was even throughout, but I really noticed it like during the start when I would come onto the wings, I'd have like my lanyard that says NHS on it. And, they tell me to go to whatever cell and I'd go to them. Some of them wouldn't want to look at me. They're like, go away. That's because they're maybe embarrassed to kind of have some of their mates know that they're being seen by me, by mental health. And then you got some people who really wanted that because they wanted to get out of the wings. But what was the question? I forgot.
It was, have you, for the, your patients, in the prison that were receptive to the therapy, did you see like meaningful change?
Yes, I did, but slow. And also, I say slow because everyone works at different pace. And also I found that because we're all so different types of therapy suited people differently as well. So as an occupational therapist, our type of therapy is more like activity based. It's more practical. Even our assessments it's very practical. So I found that a lot of people are more receptive to that because it wasn't like talking therapy like CPT as such. Like there is an element of talking, but not as much as like uncovering like some of the trauma and talking them through that. So I've definitely found a lot of successes in that, and also supporting people, like I said, earlier on, who didn't have a diagnosis, and supporting them through the diagnosis process, creating communication packs with maybe the speech and language therapist to help them, cope within the prison setting. And, you could really see the change, even like in terms of risk, less incidences, less time spent in maybe segregation as they would before. And just even like, being out in the community later on, I would work with the community team quite closely as well and trying to help them continue that support, because it doesn't just end in prison. And, a lot of the time people are essentially sent out, they're released from prison and then that's that. And that's where you see the recalls or the reoffending when there isn't the right support in the community as well. So I definitely found a lot of successes, but I would say mental health, it tends to be slower because people work at different paces. Yeah.
Incredible. And that was that the inspiration for the TED Talk, that your experience in your time in the prison? And obviously, great TED Talk, by the way. Everybody should go and watch it. I don't want to obviously spoil it. I think you should go and watch it. But was that the inspiration for?
Yeah, it was that was a huge inspiration. And also, even though I knew I wanted to work in mental health, I still had, my own internal biases around not just mental health, but people who had committed certain criminal offences, right? And to work in mental health or even a forensic setting, you do have to have a degree of empathy to be able to support these type of people. And I often would say that it kind of messed up with that, my I guess my moral, what I thought was, right and wrong at times. And I'd always try to separate the person from the crime they had committed, especially if it was a high profile crime, which we got a lot of those things. So that talk was also centered around, empathy, which doesn't always mean agreeing with somebody, but actually understanding how they got to that point, understanding their journey. So it definitely made me more of an empathetic person, very patient, and just being able to compartmentalize the crime, the mental health, and the person.
Yeah. I like the talk because exactly like you were saying, empathy. It was an open question. I was like, I mean, okay, I'm not gonna spoil it completely, but the question was around having empathy for people who've committed crimes, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of people do find that difficult. Yeah. Again, depending on what level of crime that is. Why do you think we're like that? Why do you think we lack that empathy for somebody who is committed whatever crime it is, and we kind of almost look down on them in a way?
Sometimes it makes us uncomfortable, to, I guess, be maybe face to face or close to somebody who's committed a certain crime, which you deem as morally wrong. Certain stereotypes and biases that you might already have in your mind about people who've committed crimes, like especially people who've committed reoccurring crimes and always find themselves in and out of prison. Usually those are the people who get left behind. They're like, there's no hope for them. There's nothing you can do with that person. So there's a lot of different factors as to why people might initially think, and I'm sure they do have empathy to a certain degree, but it always depends on the situation and what, you're having empathy for. So it doesn't take away from, just because you're not maybe empathetic to a certain situation or person, it doesn't make you an unempathetic person. It just really depends on the situation. But it's more about, being open-minded and willing to learn and just willing to listen. Yeah. That's, all it really takes. Just listen. And whether you agree or disagree with the situation or with the person's actions, that's fine. You've got that right to think that way. But just listen and allow somebody to tell their story.
Wow. Yeah. I can imagine a lot of people are listening like, that is very tough.
It's not for everyone. Yeah,
it isn't. But I think if anybody says, again, I don't want to judge anybody, but if anybody's saying they're a good person, then I think that if you're saying you're a good person, then I think you should be able to empathize with people, not only just the good people, but empathize with people who, they might have done bad things, but like you said, understand the reasons behind why they did bad things. Another thing that you talked about, and we didn't actually mention what that was, we spoke about it a little bit, neurodivergent. What does that actually mean when you say neurodivergent?
Yeah. So with neurodiversity, or like I like to sort of refer to it as a neurodevelopmental condition, because it's a condition where the chemical changes in the brain don't necessarily line up. And it can cause, people to react differently in terms of their surroundings, in terms of how they process things. So it's just how the brain processes information and processes it differently to somebody else who might find it easier to carry out certain tasks. And I know we mentioned autism, so ASD and ADHD as well, which most people know about. But there are many other different types of conditions like dyscalculia. I think I'm saying that right. So that's essentially finding it difficult to process like numbers. Then you have dyspraxia, which is more about like, balance and even memory loss as well. So there's different neurodevelopmental conditions. And even though people talk about, I think it's great, people are talking about neurodiversity, which is great, but I don't know if it's as easily accepted just yet. Maybe because more recently, more people have come out about being neurodivergent. And also it looks differently on other people. Like some people, they might find it hard to concentrate. And then you got another person saying, oh, well, I find it hard to concentrate. Does that mean that I have ADHD? Or, you know, like something silly as that. And the process to be diagnosed as someone who's got ADHD, it's a long process. You know, it's usually done by I would say it takes a couple of, I mean, like if you're going privately, it can be quicker. So it maybe takes a couple of weeks.
Okay.
So you got, I think, a couple of hours of the actual, you know, questioning with you and the psychiatrist, or it can be a psychologist as well. And then they formulate the report, they get a background, they maybe speak to family members. So there's a lot of work that gets into it, and they don't just dish out, they shouldn't dish out diagnosis just like that. So it takes a lot to be that. But then you've got people who self-diagnose as well, which is a whole controversial thing as well.
Yeah.
I suppose where I stand with that is because it's so hard to get a diagnosis because of the waiting list, and because it's so expensive if you go privately, so it costs like thousands of pounds. I'm not mad at people finding out more about, you know, their experiences and how, you know, maybe some of the struggles that they're facing, and maybe sharing that amongst each other. I'm not mad at that. But of course, like to actually get a diagnosis, it should be properly done. And sometimes it can be dangerous as well, because you might diagnose yourself with something, but it could be something else. You know, you just never know. So I guess I'm split in the middle with that.
Why are they not doing these diagnoses like as like very early? They do all these health kind of things on us when we're babies, check for if we've got diseases, check if our heart is fine. But why don't they do the mental? Of course, as a baby you might not know, but when we get to a certain age, why don't they just do something mandatory to be like, okay, let me check for this, let me check for that?
So well, two things. Usually neurodevelopmental conditions are usually spotted, you know, earlier on in childhood, and they should be. Oftentimes they can be missed because of, you know, various reasons. Maybe the young child might be masking their condition. So that masking usually refers to somebody who's, you know, I wouldn't say hiding, but using alternative ways to combat their condition. So maybe they're, you know, you got some people who might write things down all the time. They're struggling, but they're not necessarily telling people that they're struggling. They're having like post-it notes everywhere and all jumbled up, you know, so you've got that. But it's much harder, I think, for people to even accept a diagnosis later on in age, because then you've got that, from what I hear, you've got that, I guess, level of either guilt or resentment, you know, feeling that you struggled all your life. So I do understand that side of things. But do you know what? Another thing is, a lot of health professionals, a lot of them don't know too much about neurodiversity. They're not always trained in that sense, even doctors at times. So you do, you know, have to do extra training for that. So at times, that's why maybe when you go to a GP and you discuss like certain, you know, issues that you're facing, it might not necessarily be picked up as easily because they might just not know, you know. And like I said, with neurodiversity, it's being spoken about now, but it's only more recently that it's being taken as seriously, you know, as it should be. And oftentimes people focus on those who might be on the spectrum where you can clearly see that there's something wrong, like maybe someone with autism, but you've got people who are functioning better even with autism compared to others who you can actually quite tell.
Like it's like a different level of like autism and stuff like that. And you know what, it's funny you say that, because neurodiversity, that term, I only heard about it this year. But I've heard of ADHD, I've heard of autism, not that I knew like a lot about it. And I think it's like you say, I think it's something that we're still learning. And I think we're still learning society that some of us may have it.
Yeah.
We don't even know we have it. And then can we even diagnose it? Is there like a really accurate way to diagnose it?
Yeah.
As well. It seems like it's a little bit tough. In terms of bridging that gap, right, in, you know, neurodiversity, how should we be in a way when we're, you know, trying to figure out if somebody has those challenges and we want to understand that a little bit more?
Yeah. I think education is key. So educating yourself in terms of, you know, what kind of conditions are out there and how they present. And this is more for, actually, it's for everyone. I was going to say professionals, but actually it could be for anyone. Just to have a bit of knowledge, even if it's just a basic amount of knowledge on the different types of conditions, so that you're able to then signpost, you know, the person to the right place. Education in various spaces, so even the workplace as well, in schools, supporting teachers with maybe the extra training, or supporting schools with you know, having more specialist support in there. And then I would also say targeting communities who maybe just don't know anything about that. And I'm talking about communities, maybe, like I said, I'm Nigerian. And if I talk to some family members and I talk to them about neurodiversity, they're going to look at me like I'm crazy. I mean, they're just trying to wrap their head around mental health. But now I bring in neurodiversity. And you know what? You'd be very surprised with how many of the older generation, Afro-Caribbean generation, and even other cultures as well, where our parents, grandparents might have traits of neurodiversity, 100%. Right? And I'll give you an example of a patient, and quite a few patients, but there was one lady I was working with. She was from Congo, and she was in the community, but she came into hospital because she had a relapse in her mental health. So when we're trying to get her back into the community, into her own flat with a good package of care, you know, some mental health support, it was time to go into her flat. And it was in a state. You had like, you know, suitcases everywhere. And, you know, it was clear that this lady had a hoarding problem. And actually I don't know the actual stats, but especially when it comes to Afro-Caribbean households, you will find that it's more of a problem in terms of hoarding, right? And, you know, there are different levels. You're laughing.
No, look, I hear it. I mean, I've seen it.
Yeah. And if you even want to dig,
if
you want to dig deeper, a lot of the time there's a psychological element to it as well. So when we're talking about trauma and some of the things that our parents, grandparents, and, you know, whoever generations above have had to deal with, where perhaps maybe they didn't have much growing up. So now that they have, it's not even a lot, but now that they have something, to get rid of it is difficult. To not have it, it perhaps triggers them in a way that they might not recognize as something psychological, you know? So when I read about that and I then saw that in my practice, that again made me more vocal, especially when, you know, advocating for my Black and ethnic minority patients and actually stating like, no, this is a hoarding problem. Let's get them the clinical help to support them in that sense. But then also being more empathetic again towards, you know, family members, the older generation, where, you know, usually I'd be like shouting, saying, oh, why can't we throw this away? Why is everything so cluttered? And really just taking time, not necessarily to unpack, but just to be patient with them.
Wow.
So
you know, I never thought about the hoarding thing, but wow, yeah, you're absolutely right. That is, oh God, that is rife in the culture. Yeah. Yeah. What are the reasons for that? And, you know, fleeing, leave another country, like you said, come in, maybe immigrating and not having much, and then when you have stuff, that is it's crazy.
It's a whole lot to unpack. Yeah, makes you think.
Wow. So something else that I kind of stumbled on a few years ago, right? And I haven't, maybe I've missed this. I haven't seen a lot of people talk about it, and it was a seasonal affective disorder, right? And that's, you know, known as S.A.D.
Yeah.
Great name, right? For those that don't know what that is, what is seasonal affective disorder? And I guess what symptoms does somebody experience when they get seasonal affective disorder?
So seasonal affective disorder is a type of depression that usually comes around, certain seasons, more specifically and more commonly, autumn, winter times, where the days are shorter, there's less sunlight, gets colder, people are indoors more. So people tend to suffer from seasonal affective disorder during those times and those periods during the year. I suppose there is more research into that now, but in terms of the clinical side of things, I mean, it's still under the umbrella of depression. So you would treat it as that, but there are more specialists now treating seasonal affective disorder separately. And the type of symptoms that people who have that usually face is irritability during those periods, isolation. So again, because they're indoors more often, maybe because it's cold, or people tend to stay inside during those seasons anyway. Lack of sleep, sometimes oversleeping. It can affect your appetite. So people maybe tend to eat more, or they tend to eat less. So it really varies from person to person. And again, like in terms of the evidence for it, like from what I've read, it could be due to the lack of sunlight. So the lack of vitamin D, serotonin or melatonin, which looks at the hormone imbalance. And because there is a hormone imbalance, it then affects the mood. So with SAD, it really depends on how often it occurs. So if this is something that's really consistent, then, I guess you would know that you've got seasonal affective disorder. But like I said, in terms of treatments, it would usually be along the same lines of treatment that you would have for depression.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. It's something that I heard and I was like, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Winter. Yeah. Wow. I think people's moods are generally, I think, is probably, not as high as summer. When it's summer, I feel like everybody's popping, everybody's excited. I want to be out but when it's winter, it's a little bit more, let's say, dull. Not that people are not out, but the general mood is dull, and actually it's probably linked to that.
Yeah, and it's also a time where people are reflecting more. It's coming towards the end of the year. You're now starting to think about the New Year's resolutions that you had, or the goals that you had at the start of the year, and maybe if you haven't achieved certain things, like those type of thoughts start to increase more. And now you're thinking about the next year it's only a couple of weeks away, so there's a whole lot of things a whole lot of factors that are put into play when it comes to that.
Yeah. There was another thing that I was thinking about, right? As I was thinking about this, conversation I was going to have with you, and it dawned on me that we have a huge after works drinks culture in the UK.
Tell me about it.
It's huge, right?
Yeah.
So I guess from your point of view, being a therapist, right? Being a person that studies the mind, I guess, why do you think that is the case? And I guess, what's the impact of that being the case, on our mental health?
Yeah. I think just innately as human beings, we were made to want to be around people, made to, socialize. And, that's what we do. Obviously, you have some people who are more introverted than others, but essentially people want to be around people. And that lack of socialization can impact, your mental health in a negative way. And that's why even during the pandemic, you saw a lot of people start to have more mental health problems. If they didn't have before, they would, have them now, because we were so isolated, not just from people, but also from activities that were meaningful to us. So we would, in my line of work, we would call that occupational deprivation. So, but in terms of the work drinks as well, like you said, it's definitely a very British thing. But if we look at the psychology of that, essentially it's just wanting to be around people. And, it's said that a lot of the chemicals in our brain are increased through being around people. And it can definitely help in terms of having a good mental health, but also getting people into a routine of seeing people. Now, like I said, for various reasons, whether you're introverted or you might have social anxiety, that might not always work for you. I know for myself, I don't always enjoy going to the pub afterwards. And I don't know, maybe that's culturally, like in my culture, like why are we going to the pub all the time for? But then for other people, it's a thing that, you know, makes them happy and it makes them feel that they've got something to do after work, makes them feel fulfilled. So it really just depends. But yeah, we are definitely social creatures.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. We definitely are. And actually that would make sense, to be fair, why some people are so keen. And actually working from home, I think the flip side of work from home, like you said, is that people do have that, they do feel that isolation as well when they're not connecting with their colleagues and they're just speaking to them over a Teams call or Zoom chat. Another thing I was thinking about, right, was there's this weird thing that happens where, as somebody is on the rise, like we're supporting a creator or we're supporting somebody starting a business or maybe an up and coming actor, we're very supportive of them on the way up. But when they get there, it's like we almost, not everybody, but I would say people start wishing for their downfall. I'm trying to understand, why does that happen? Why is it? Because they don't wish for their downfall when they're up and coming. In fact, it's more like almost pity. It's almost like, oh, I'm raring for you, I want you to succeed. And when you succeed, is like envy. Okay, you need to fail, I want to, you know, all of that. Why does that happen? I'm trying to understand
what's that saying, you know, I don't even know what the saying is, but essentially a lot of people want people to do well, especially if it's their friends and family members, or if you've come from a certain area that you can relate to in terms of that person, you know, succeeding in their success. But once they start to do better than you, or maybe achieving some of the things that you have on your goals list or your wish list to do, they, like you said, there can be an element of envy, jealousy, but also reflecting on yourself and thinking that, oh, why am I not there yet? You know, why haven't I achieved this? Like, didn't we grow up in the same area? Aren't we the same age? Or am I, you know, maybe you're older than the person. Like, you know, you see all these young people who are becoming more successful quickly, especially on social media. And some people might feel envious of that because maybe they've had to go through that traditional route of getting a job, a 9-to-5, going to uni and all that kind of stuff. So it really is a personal thing, and it might just be also how you view yourself and how much you're impacted by other people's journey. And I always say that, for me anyway, envy sometimes is good because sometimes it can push you and make you more motivated to work for, you know, whatever you want to reach. But when it crosses over to, let's say, jealousy, or then it's impacting how you interact with somebody, especially your friends, like you said, supporting them less, it can create that friction in terms of relationships. And it'll do more harm than it does any good. It doesn't do any good, not just for that person, but also for yourself. So it's always good to sort of, when you catch yourself, because it can be a natural thing. And I'm sure most people have felt that. When you catch yourself maybe acting a little bit different, or maybe not being as supportive to somebody like you usually would, it's always good to self-reflect and actually think, why is this happening? Where is this stemming from? So that could look like journaling, speaking to someone. I speak to friends all the time, and we're all doing different things in terms of career. So it's always good to kind of look back and reflect, because it could be you on the other end where you're successful now, and maybe you're surpassing some of your friends, whether that's, you know, financially, it could be career-wise, whatever. You might have a whole different experience. And, you know, how would you feel if your friends are supporting you less? And people notice, you know, people really do notice. As much as, you know, you get your accolades from other people, most people the people that they want to hear from, or that they value in terms of their opinion the most, are from their friends.
100%.
100%, right? So it's like, I know I do, like, as much as I'm, you know, speaking sometimes to lots of people, I'm always looking out for my friends, and whatever they say, you know, obviously we'll take it with a pinch of salt as well, but, you know, it adds a lot more value. But it definitely happens, and it's natural. You know, it's natural. It's just how you deal with it.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. And I think it's interesting. It's interesting because I think, like you said, I think it's the natural thing to do is compare yourself to somebody that you might not even know them, and you still have that envy for them. It's very easy to compare and be like, well, a few years ago we were at the same level and they were upcoming, I was supporting them, but now they're way ahead of me.
Yeah.
Another thing linked to that is, I feel like as a society, you know, famous people, high profile people, you know, they're famous and they're high profile for a reason. A lot of people follow them. I feel like we're getting to a point where a lot of these people, we don't, again, talking on the topic of empathy, we kind of lack that empathy for them. Again, why do you think that is happening with these really high profile people? Why do you think we lack empathy for them? Is it just because we just see them through a screen and there's like, okay, we don't really personally know them, so whatever?
I mean, for a lot of them, you know, for a lot of people, it doesn't have to be famous people or celebrities, but they, you know, people, especially on social media, tend to only show like the good sides on social media, right? And there are a lot of high profile people who might be struggling, whether that's mentally or like other things are happening in their lives, that we as the people who maybe look up to them in terms of their success and whatnot might not always be privy to that. I also feel like because of how social media is, and the connection between those who are high profile and, let's say, their audience, sometimes the lines are blurred, in terms of the audience maybe having more access to said celebrity or high profile person. So it's almost like they feel entitled, you know. So yes, you're complaining about, you know, what happened to you last week. Maybe even something as serious as like, oh, they got into a car crash, but what, it wasn't a Range Rover, or, you know, you've got all the money, or you've got private health insurance, or, you know, so there's always, I suppose, a caveat as to why people shouldn't be as empathetic towards that person, because maybe they're just looking at their success and almost not even seeing them as a human being anymore. And that's the dangerous thing, because they are human beings at the end of the day. It's just that we don't know their full story. As much as we research them, as much as, you know, they're online most of the time, like I said, people only show you what they want you to see. They won't show you them crying or being bankrupt and all that kind of stuff. Most of the time they won't. So I think the entitlement causes people to be less empathetic towards people who are high profile, and they think, well, you've got all the money, that solves everything, when it doesn't always. It helps. I completely agree. Absolutely, it helps, but yeah.
I completely agree. So in terms of tips, I wanted to, you know, end it off with some tips. You know, obviously therapy is obviously a great way to, you know, help improve your mental health. But outside of therapy, what are some things that someone can do to, you know, help improve their mental health?
I would say keep yourself busy with things that are meaningful to you, and don't necessarily put too much pressure on you. So you always hear about people saying, oh, find a hobby or find something, you know, you can do outside of, let's say, your 9 to 5 or your, you know, what you do for work. But it doesn't have to be anything serious. It could literally be something like watching a Netflix show or a series or whatnot. Like, it doesn't have to be that. Going out for walks helps as well. Or going out to do exercise. I play tennis just for fun. I'm not the greatest, but, you know, I still play. Seeing friends. So like I said, we are social creatures. So even if it's seeing friends in person or speaking to friends on the phone, someone that you can kind of sound off from, and also even journaling. So even self-reflecting on, you know, why you're thinking the way that you're, you know, thinking, and almost like, because a lot of the time, once you write things down, you're actually able to really see clearly, you know, where those thoughts come from. And obviously, it's not to say that you should be your own therapist, but it's good to have that written out. You know, and it could be in the form of writing, or some people like to, you know, record themselves and whatnot. I've heard of some creative ways. So essentially, it's about keeping yourself, busy, but obviously not to the extent where you're overloading yourself. But ensuring that there is purpose outside of just chasing the money, chasing the success, because it's up and down. You know, what's going to happen when you're in that down moment, you know, which happens to a lot of successful people. What else can you do to support your mental health apart from, you know, obviously seeking professional support if it gets to that point? So I would say those are the tips.
Amazing, amazing. Jenny, it's been such an insightful conversation. I had so many more questions that I definitely want to speak to you about, and I definitely want to do like a part 2. Because I feel like it's an important conversation, and there's so many areas that I want to like discuss. I guess what do you have planned next for yourself?
What do I have planned? So, next year I'll be working on a documentary.
Okay, wow. Congratulations.
Can I say so much about it? Thank you. But it will be around like some of the things that we've mentioned. And, you know, I'll obviously continue to, you know, showcase what I do for work. And like I said at the start, you know, I'm really passionate about ensuring that we are talking more about mental health within the Black community, and ensuring that the right resources are there for those who have mental health conditions or neurodevelopmental conditions. So I'm, you know, going to be doing more of that. What else have I got coming up? I suppose, you know, with my business SASA, that's growing as well. So like I said, I do a lot of initial assessments for these neurodevelopmental conditions. And again, trying to bridge that gap between those who can't access it for various reasons. So I'm out and about, and you know.
And where can people find you if they want to, obviously if they wanted to check out SASA to obviously, you know, diagnose themselves and, you know, just like hear more from you and see, you know, follow your content? So
for SASA, you can go on our website, which is www.wearesasa.com, and you can find me on LinkedIn, so Jenny Okolo, socials, so Instagram, Jen Okolo. I get a lot of people who are just intrigued to learn more about just mental health or certain conditions, and obviously I don't, you know, offer clinical support via these platforms. But it's always great to have like discussions like that. I'm always willing to have a chat with someone, because I could go on and on, really.
You think that would be something that you may offer in the future? It's just like, I've got all these business ventures right now.
I mean, I suppose because I still have my 9 to 5 where I do that. And, you know, like I said, around balance, I'm trying to, you know, make sure I dedicate enough time to focus on other endeavors, but then also just focus on myself and ensure that I practice what I preach.
Keep doing your thing. Keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing work. It's very needed work, and you know, very happy that we had this conversation today, because I think it's a very, very important conversation. I want to have more of these you know, kind of conversations, and also just delve into the areas that we don't talk a lot about, because neurodiversity, like you said, the obvious ones are ADHD, but you know, calculus, and then there was another one that you mentioned. These things are not things that people think. So actually, numbers are, you know, when people say I'm not good at numbers, maybe actually it is actually a legit thing,
there
right?
Could be something there.
You know, it's not you can just work hard and get through it. It might actually be a legit thing. So yeah, such an important conversation. Do you have any final words for the audience?
I mean, I just want to say thank you for having me on here. And, you know, like you said, there's so many other topics, you know, around mental health, like even finance and how that impacts mental health and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, essentially it's for people, my message is for people to try and be empathetic, just listen. Like I said, you don't have to necessarily agree with the action or, you know, what the person's done or how they came to that point, but it's just about listening, and you'd really be surprised with how much you can learn from just hearing a person's story.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's a great way to end it off. Watchers, listeners, thanks for tuning into this episode of the podcast, and we'll see you next week.